Thank you for having us, GLEIF, here. XBRL and GLEIF have been working together for quite a few years now, and I'll illustrate that during my presentation. So it's an honor to be here as one of the keynote to share what GLEIF has done in the last 10 years and what we intend to do in the next 10 years or 5 years. Let's be step by step in this future. So as a reminder, who is the Global Legal Entity Identifier Foundation? So GLEIF is a Swiss not-for-profit foundation founded by the Financial Stability Board. So that's quite unique in the world of standards. It's a standards body that have been created by regulators after the financial crisis. And we are still overseen today by regulators, 71 regulators from all over the planet, who sits on the Regulatory Oversight Committee. We have a private board, as I call it, of 18 independent directors, pro bono, who supports us in terms of strategy, introduction to their industry, expertise. And we rely on a decentralized network of 38 LEI issuing company, or LEI issuers, also called as LOUs, who are in charge of verifying companies before issuing legal entity identifiers to them through a very thorough verification process. So far, 2.7 million LEIs have been issued globally. It may seem small as a number, knowing that there are more than 300, 400 million legal entities probably outside in the world, but it represents, based on some consultancy firm numbers or statistics, around 80% of global trading value. So it's quite significant, in fact. So important to mention that the LEI is a standard, so it's the ISO 17442 standard. That standard has multiple parts. The first part is about defining what an LEI is, a 20-character long string reference. Part two is how do you include an LEI into digital certificates. So we're going into the digital world already with part two. And part three, which has been approved and voted on this year, is about the VLEI, so the verifiable legal entity identifier. I will talk to you about in a minute. So what is the LEI? So I started by introducing our organization, but what is an LEI? Well, it's really a passport for companies. So the same way that I have a national identity card that I can use in Europe, in my country, to travel, to open account, to buy alcohol if I prove that I'm over 16 in Belgium, 21 in other countries. I can't really use my national identity card when I travel to the US or Hong Kong. I need a passport. Well, similarly, as a company, when you have your business registry identity, that your national authorized source of identity in Spain, for example, have issued to you, it works in Spain. But if you try to use that in another country, the counterparty needing to validate your existence will have to look for that information, probably hire a lawyer in Spain to prove that you exist. It's not that efficient. And that's really why the LEI was created as a passport for companies to present themselves when they do business outside of their country and also inside of their country, more and more. The same way that I can use my passport today in my country to do onboarding into a bank. I don't have to show my Belgian national identity card, I can show my passport. Well, now LEI is more and more used within domestic borders, also as an identifier for companies to either do regulatory reporting or to identify themselves to do onboarding to a bank or to identify themselves as a counterparty to a transaction. So a bit of history, 10 years. We're celebrating our 10 years anniversary this year. It's an honor to join the organization after such a great foundational work has been built by my predecessor, Stefan Wolf, and the team. And it has evolved significantly. So the original use case for LEI was financial crisis, Lehman Brothers collapsed. You would say, well, okay, one legal entity goes down. Well, it's not one legal entity. Obviously, Lehman Brothers was hundreds and hundreds of legal entities in many, many countries collapsing overnight. And at the time, regulators, but also banks, realized very easily, very quickly, that they had no idea of the exposure they had on those hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of legal entities collapsing overnight. What's my risk? Am I even exposed to that Lehman Brothers collapse? And at that time, the G20 in Paris mandated the Financial Stability Board to create a system for identifying legal entities because it was complicated to trace all those legal entities collapsing because of the fact that their identification and their reference data was at national level, was locked in a country, was not available as easily as it should have been to other to counterparties outside of the national borders of the incorporation of that country, of that company. So it started in the OTC derivative space because that's why the 2008 crisis happened, but it's slowly and surely now expanding to other use cases. There are many use cases where legal entities needs to be identified, not only for OTC derivative reporting or counterparty identification. In cross-border payments, for example, it's way easier to screen on an identifier than to screen for money laundering or CFT on a name and address, which will be IBM at one bank and International Business Machine at the other bank. So always that challenge of structured reference data, and you know what you're talking about at XBRL. It's also moving into the supply chain space with the support of ICC and how to identify counterparties in the supply chain and ensure that the authenticity of documents, for example, is guaranteed. And also in ESG, as there as well, it covers pretty much the entire spectrum of global trade, and identification of supply chain counterparties and entities is essential. It's now moving into the internet and digital space, and I will explain how, with a very, very strong framework that could help significantly avoiding fraud, making verify companies and the people working for that companies in digital platforms. So a bit of LEI adoption information beyond the original use case of derivatives and capital markets. In payments, we see LEI being adopted not only cross-border, but also domestic. For example, Bank of England will use the LEI as the identifier for counterparties in CHAPS, the new CHAPS ISO 222 base system. You're looking at the European Union level for instant payments regulation. It also enables the use of the LEI to ease the verification of payee in transactions where you need to quickly screen transactions and ensure that you're not paying the wrong counterparty, and also to prevent a lot of fraud. Very little known facts. Actually, banks, you may not know that, but most banks don't match the name of the account with the account number. So meaning that it's very easy to substitute an account and pretend that it belongs to a IBM, for example, to take my initial example. And that will be less and less possible in the future because regulations is now forcing banks to validate name of account and account. And the best way to do that is obviously to use an identifier and not a name that can be that cannot be necessarily recorded the same way in various databases. In other jurisdictions, in Asia in particular, China is also using LEI in the China Interbank Payment System, SIPS, which is kind of an equivalent of SWIFT, but for the Chinese counterparts, I would say, not only in China, but outside of China. You also have the Reserve Bank of India, who has adopted the LEI for the identification of counterparties to FX transactions, but also domestic and cross-border payments. And on the pure cross-border payment space, recently the FSB published a report on the progress towards a fast, efficient, inclusive payment system, cross-border payment system, and LEI is clearly identified as a way to enable that fast, efficient, inclusive payment system globally because it ensures some clarity on counterparties involved into a payments. The BIS CPMI, so the Committee on Payments and Market Infrastructure is also recommending the LEI to identify, alongside the BIC standard for banks, to identify the counterparties to payments. And in the FATF, Financial Access Task Force revision of the Recommendation 16, which is called the Travel Rule, it's also looking at promoting the LEI in that regulation to ensure, in that recommendation, sorry, to ensure, again, that structured data like the LEI will make that process of screening more efficient. If you look at LEI in supply chain, so we are privileged to work with the International Chamber of Commerce and specifically the Digital Standards Initiative, who is looking at standardizing trade documents and data in trade documents in a way that that digital platform can be put in place and be interoperable with one another. And LEI and VLEI has been identified as an organizational identity system that could be very useful to be applied to the various trade platforms in an interoperable way. And of course, with efficiency gains at the end. An example of where the LEI is used as part of a digital certificates, this is a Chinese example, where the e-seal and the China Financial Certification Authority is issuing to companies in China is including the LEI as a way to have that Chinese seal recognizable outside of China, because at the end of the day, that's what global trade is all about, is ensuring that there is this recognition and interoperability between identity systems. And finally, in ESG, so we are getting a lot of queries and requests for collaboration from the various bodies in this industry, standards bodies, but also companies like the UN, for example, companies like UNDP, looking at helping ESG reporting, but also the applicability of standards around ESG to be more efficient, using the LEI as a way to identify companies involved in those processes. So what about the next 10 years? So I showed you what we've been doing so far. The next 10 years will really be about, as I said, build on those amazingly strong foundations that my predecessor has built with the team. It's going to be about making the LEI used more globally. So today it's very much used in Europe, in the US, more and more in Asia. It's lacking behind in Africa and Latin America and Middle East. So we want to, except in UAE, where it's increasingly, it's actually very much used, but we want to make that standard a global standard as it should be. There is no country where LEI is not used except North Korea, but we want to make it really used everywhere as a common public good to ensure that companies can be identified for whatever purposes everywhere globally. So regionalization will be an important focus of the next 5 years. The LEI and the VLEI as growth driver. So the VLEI will mention what we're talking about in a second, is moving from just identifying companies and providing reference data to those companies, or at least publishing reference data about those companies, to a more organizational identity framework that can not only help with company identification, but also people acting on behalf of organization. So I'll cover that in a second. And finally, it's continuing the, I would say, expansion of the LEI usage in various use cases to increase the value of the LEI. We want the LEI to be not only valuable to the regulators who created it and to the banks in their risk and transparency needs. We also want that LEI is useful for the legal entity themselves in a way that it helps them onboard faster to banks, in banks, for example, in a way that it helps them fulfill the requirements in terms of ESG reporting, their monitoring of their suppliers, etc., etc. And that will be a major focus of the next 5 to 10 years. So now the VLEI. I wanted to finish with this because it's an important evolution of what GLEIF has been working on. The VLEI really is, it's called Verifiable Legal Entity Identifier. It's a self-sovereign identity or decentralized identity and verifiable credential system built specifically for, for organization, with organizations in mind. It's really about ensuring that signing by people acting on behalf of companies, verification of companies on digital platform is done in a secure and global way through a very robust governance framework. So what does it do is that, and it's not pretty unique, it is unique. There is no other verifiable credential systems out there that does that. It's cryptographically linking people acting on behalf of the company to the company with their role in the transactions that they're acting on behalf of the companies. So it means that today, when you digitally signing contracts on DocuSign, for example, you have a digital certificate. That digital certificate is not linked at all to your company, meaning that if you leave the company tomorrow, I can still sign as Alexandre Kech, pretend that I'm CEO of GLEIF, although I'm no longer CEO of GLEIF. That systems enable a clear, verifiable link between an individual acting on behalf of the company and the company itself, to the point that if I leave GLEIF tomorrow, my verifiable credential is revoked by GLEIF on the day, and I will not be able to use it anymore as a CEO of GLEIF. All my past signatures will be valid because I was CEO yesterday, but tomorrow I'm no longer CEO. I'm no longer able to act on behalf of my company. It's not only about digital signature, it's also about accessing a system. It's about being allowed to even go into a building. Those credentials could really be used for multi-purpose in a way that is unimaginable and will be implemented in the coming years. It's based on a very strong root of trust, a trust chain where GLEIF, overseen by regulators, created by regulators, is the root of trust, and a network of verifiers, if you wish, who are issuing those VLEIs to the companies and ensuring that they issue those credentials to the right company. And then the organization itself is autonomous after that to issue their own credentials, manage their own credentials, revoke credentials if necessary. So the use cases are endless. I'm going to show two of them that are live and actually involve XBRL. So the first one is our annual report. So every year we submit our annual report like every company would do. And we are using the VLEI system for the CEO to digitally sign the XBRL instance of the report, the CFO to sign its part, the auditors to sign its part, the CMO, Chief Marketing Officer, to sign its part. So as you can see, it's you can really responsibilize every individual and party that needs to be accountable for signing their parts into an annual report and do so through the verifiable credential. There is another use case that is currently being piloted by the EBA, the European Banking Authority. They are using the VLEI to authenticate banks connecting to the system of the EBA. So instead of a login password, the bank presents its credential. The EBA knows that it's Société Générale and it's not BNP Paribas. That's the first use case. So authentication and verification and permissioning into a system. And the individual within this bank who is allowed to do EBA Pillar 3 reporting will be signing that report, which means that EBA can be sure that it's the right person in that company who signed the report and not someone else, for example. Very strong use case. And all the use cases here are use cases that we are seeing being proposed around the VLEI by the qualified VLEI issuers, so the network of VLEI issuers we're working with to issue those credentials to companies around the world. So it's very broad. So I will stop here to allow for some time, hopefully, for questions, unless I went over already. No? I invite you to follow us for the next 5 years and see how we're going according to our strategy.
Thank you very much, Alex. At XBRL International, we've been very strong admirers of the LEI, and we do encourage its use in many regulatory contexts, not least the opportunities that the VLEI presents. I was told the other day that XBRL opens up all kinds of opportunities, but people don't understand it, and we need a much bigger marketing budget. I suspect you need an even bigger marketing budget. I wonder whether you could just, you had a slide there about growth, but where do you think that growth will come from? Will it come from things like the ICC effort? Will it come from a telco effort? Will it come from directly the VLEI or LEI more generally?
Good question. So the focus this next year or so will be on cross-border payments, because we have the privilege to have the FSB behind us and helping us with that. So obviously this is mandates have been one of the drivers of usage of LEI in the past, and it will continue. But we need to evolve into more a voluntary usage of the LEI, and that's where, for example, our collaboration with the ICC around supply chain management and demonstrating the value of an LEI for the legal entities themselves in that process will be important. So I would say cross-border payments and global trade in general in the coming years. The VLEI is difficult to know how fast the outcome will be. Remember the previous speaker talking about it's difficult to, we generally overestimate the immediate impact of a technology, underestimate its longer term impact. This is clearly a technology where there's a lot of enthusiasm. I don't know how quickly it will grow, but we could have a hockey stick type of use of adoption without even doing much about it, because the technology and the infrastructure is so strong and the value proposition is so strong that it's going to be done by others, not us only, and our marketing budget is not necessarily that much needed for that one.
Okay, I have some questions from the floor. Mark, if we could get a microphone to you.
Thank you. I'm Marc Coulier, so I'm a user of data. So we collect data in which companies are identified using LEIs, and we are very thankful for that. In a recent consultation paper by ESMA about the identification of transaction in crypto assets, ESMA made a consultation asking which identifiers should be used. And they mentioned that the European Commission raised some concerns about ESMA's initial advice. It was to only use the LEI, but the paper does not mention which were the concerns from the European Commission. So do you have any idea what those might be, and are you also working with the Commission to address them?
That's a very complicated question, because in the Regulatory Oversight Committee that oversees my work, there is the ESMA and there is the European Commission. So you will see that I'm going to try to answer your question to ensure that I will not lose my job tomorrow. Clearly there is a discussion between the regulators in general in Europe, ESMA, EBA, IOTA, no, what is it? I always forget that one, and the European Commission about identifiers. And the regulators are clearly behind the LEI, because that's what they've been requiring for almost 10 years now. All their system is based on the LEI. And then there is let's say, political agenda of the Commission to privilege another identifier that they enabled, which is the EU ID, which is a European identifier, which in fact is not really an identifier. It's a concatenation of domestic identifier with a country code and a few check digits at the end, with no reference data available. So it's just a string of characters. And accessing the reference data behind is very complicated. So that's why there is this discussion, is that, yes, okay, that's an identifier that could be an alternative for European companies, but most of the regulations in Europe do not only apply to European companies. So that's why the LEI is still very relevant and must remain relevant in MiCA, but also DORA regulations, because most of the counterparties will either not be in Europe or their headquarter might be elsewhere, and you want to be able to link between the headquarter and the European entity through the LEI level 1 and level 2 information. So this is a debate. We're definitely working with the Commission to see how we can make that coexistence of identifier more useful through mappings, like we do already with the big standard, with, as you know, with other identifiers. But yeah, it is our objective. I don't believe in competitions between identifiers. I believe in complementarity, personally, and GLEIF as a whole. So we always working towards collaboration rather than believing there is a competition of standards. It doesn't make sense.
Yeah, thank you. As a user of that, I agree. I really want just one set of identifiers for a company.
So I can quote you saying, I can refer back to the Commission saying you prefer the LEI. Is that right? That's right.
Next question. Oh.
Hello, my name is Victor Den Bak, and I was wondering if the LEI is also using the different levels of assurance. Perhaps, as you know, the digital trust is of course very important, and in some places it's very easy to get a digital identity, and others are, let's say, at the level of quality of a passport or etc. And of course, in the eIDAS regulation, there are levels ranging from low to high. At what level are the line numbers, and is there any distinction made depending on the scheme on how they are issued?
So there's two parts of the question. So the legal entity identifier itself, which is the analog version of the identifier, is issued through a very thorough governance process that by LEI issuers who are qualified or accredited in each jurisdiction. So for each jurisdiction, they have to demonstrate that they have access to the authoritative source of information to be able to issue an LEI and verify that the company effectively exists and that the information provided by the company is effectively correct. So that level of verification. To the point that the system is not only created by regulators, but used by regulators all over the world as a legitimate passport, if you wish, for companies. Now, if you look at the eIDAS, the digital part of it, the VLEI, that's something we're working on today to ensure that verifiable credential issued under the VLEI construct will be recognized under the eIDAS 2.0 version, because the 2.0 is about verifiable credential. That's something that we're working with the Commission and other ETSI as well, which is a standards body for tech standards in Europe, to ensure that effectively that the VLEI will be as robust as any other credentials issued under that framework. If I'd answered that question, yeah.
And I know that for the credentials for the EU Digital Identity Wallet, that they say that the personal identification data within there must at least be in level high in order to acquire these verifiable credentials like the driving license and other criteria. So that means with your statement working with the European Commission that you're also looking at the VLEI being at level high?
Yes. So, well, interesting to know that in the eIDAS 2.0 discussion, the focus has been very much on individuals so far. So driving license, identity cards, all type of thing. Not too much organizational identity. Now, they're starting now looking at organizational identity and see how it should look like in the construct or in the concept, in the framework of eIDAS 2.0. And our view is that the VLEI issuers, so the issuers of VLEI credentials, should be QTSPs, Qualified Trusted Service Providers, to ensure that maximum level of certainty that you can have. Again, I don't have all the details about that. I'm lucky to have a team working on that with consultants, but that's my understanding of what we're trying to achieve in that space. And I see someone nodding next to you, so I hope I didn't say something stupid on that front.
Very good question. Next question, is there another one from the floor? Yes, Mark again.
My LEI friend.
Thank you. So the next question is really important to me. So our users usually, so they are financial market participants, and they refer to the financial products using the ISIN. And yes, we need to give them the information related to the company that submits the information using LEI. And the GLEIF database has information about the ISINs for each LEI. However, we found that it was not often not completely up to date, especially with new issues of financial products. I'd like to know who's responsible for keeping that up to date. Is there any responsibility? Is for instance, the European Union aware that this is not up to date, yes, and that it makes hard for us to link together the financial products with the information, yes, of the company?
So the collaboration about ISIN and LEI mapping is between ANA, so the Association of National Numbering Agency, and ourselves. And the work is done by individual numbering agencies. So it means that the coverage is not full, is not complete, and the update is not as often as we would like it to be. I think in the ANA, for the ISIN to LEI mapping, it's generally once a month or once a week, depending on the numbering agency. So that could explain some of the gaps that you've identified. That's something that we're working on a regular basis, well, that we are in discussion with ANA on a regular basis to see how we can make it better, keeping in mind that ANA doesn't have a power over the numbering agencies. It's a federated system, so they can only persuade the various national numbering agencies to do their job, to start doing their job when they don't do it, or to do their job more regularly.
Right, so if there is any help we can bring into showing evidence on...
It will always help if you can show me some evidence, in a sense that we can go back to ANA and say, okay, in that context there is a problem, can we look at it?
All right, thank you.
That would be very useful, thank you.
Great. In a similar vein, Alex, perhaps do you have any advice for regulators? There are a number of regulators in the room. One of the things that we see and we hear from a number of end users is that regulators don't always require annual updates to their LEI data. Clearly, this is an area that you will need to resolve going forward. Any advice to regulators on that, or any other issue in terms of the way that they go about utilizing the LEI in their mandates?
Yes. So clearly, this is a preoccupation for GLEIF, that ensuring that the LEIs that are issued are annually re-verified in a way. By the way, it's not because an LEI is lapsed that the reference data is behind it is wrong, and you could even have verified information on January 1st, who becomes not verified anymore 1 month later, but will only be verified 1 year later. So the annual verification process does not necessarily mean that either the data is bad or the data is good. It's just a sanity, I would say, practice that we want to continue having, because it's important to have that regular check. So advice to the regulators in the room is clearly that if you can effectively ask in your regulation or through a directive or whatever you're doing for informing users, that LEIs should be current, meaning that they should be updated in terms of not only the reference data behind it. That would help everybody, I believe, not only themselves, ensuring that they have reporting based on valid information, but also the other users of the LEI, like banks who use it for onboarding, for example, and others, to make sure that the system works as it should be, as efficiently as it could be. We
have submitted a couple of comment letters recently.
Sorry, maybe I can add something.
Yeah,
so
please.
Just for information, there is a challenge process in the Global LEI Foundation setup, meaning that you, as a user, if you believe that part of you're seeing an LEI and you don't believe the address is current, you can challenge that record. And when you challenge that record on the GLEIF website, it goes to the LEI issuer in charge, who will contact the legal entity to ensure that they update their information. So it's kind of a dynamic public good that is in the hands of everybody for the use of everybody, but also encouraging the participation of everybody to ensure that the quality is there.
Those feedback loops are incredibly important.
Yes.
Sort of related, some feedback we've been providing to regulators recently, because we do hear often from other commenters on regulations around the world, oh, well, the LEI is too expensive. And our response to that tends to be, it's $45 if you're a professional in a financial market and you can't afford $45 or euros or whatever the street price is today, then why are you in this business? But how do you comment on that? What's your perspective? Clearly, SMEs might have a valid complaint, but how does this work, do you think, going forward?
So I would say I don't think it's a valid complaint. In my life, I requested editions of 2 LEIs, once for my startup in Singapore, 10 people. It was the cost of a business lunch, $50 to get an LEI. Not much money for what value it was bringing to my startup to to be able to present myself outside of Singapore with my passport. So that's one. I have another one recently that I issued for my little Airbnb business in France, where I need to have a company. I use it more like, okay, if someone looks for my Airbnb, he will find me on the GLEIF website as well, and it looks serious. Well, I mean, it's $50 or 50 euros, depending on who you're talking to. We're not talking about a lot of money, but we understand it might be a challenge in certain jurisdictions where $50 is a lot of money. And in those type of jurisdictions, we have two models that we have in place. We have the validation agent model, which is banks who are in all over the world. Today we have about 30, I think, validation agent, Carla, around about that, so 20 to 30, doesn't matter too much. Banks who are, and other companies who are leveraging their onboarding process to request the creation of an LEI on behalf of the corporate they are, or the SME they're onboarding, to kind of help and streamline the process. So they have an onboarding process. Instead of telling them, go get an LEI, they say, okay, I'm leveraging my onboarding process, I'm connecting to an LEI, sure, and I will be asking on your behalf an LEI, and they generally sponsor the price, so that's one way. The other way is that we're working more and more on what we call bulk registry, a bulk issuance model, where we directly work with business registries and see how in those countries specifically where it is maybe too expensive, how they can help issuing LEIs for the SMEs in their jurisdiction to help them with trust creation, trust building, when they do business with companies outside of their jurisdictions.
That's terrific. Is there any other questions? Would you all like coffee? Please join with me in thanking Alex